Welcome to the Gastro Girl podcast. We bring together patients, experts, and health advocates who are all here to help you optimize your health. Here's your host, Jacqueline Gollin.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Gastro Girl podcast. Today's episode is the power of patient education and self-advocacy. We're joined by Robin, who has generously agreed to share her personal journey with Barrett's esophagus, from early GERD symptoms to diagnosis, the concerns that often come with understanding cancer risk, and how learning more helped her take an active role in her care. And we want to thank Castle Biosciences for support of this episode, which is part of a series on Barrett's esophagus. So thank you so much for joining us today, Robin. I'm so interested in your journey and your patient journey with Barrett's esophagus and GERD. So can you take us back to when you first started experiencing reflux or GERD symptoms?
You know what? I don't remember when I haven't had those symptoms. Um, and I think one of the shining moments that I can pinpoint is when I was 40, I went to Grand Cayman for my birthday and I forgot my Rolaids.
Oh.
Grand Cayman is very expensive, and we paid an enormous amount of money for a tiny little roll of Rolaids because I was miserable. So I'm 66 now, so it's been at least 26 years, but I know it was well before that.
Oh, wow. And how did it affect your quality of life?
I think I just learned to deal with it. I just was popping Rolaids and Tums like nobody's business and just went on with my life, ate what I wanted, when I wanted, and how much I wanted, and didn't let it affect me. I just pop the Tums.
And you know what you said right there, it resonates with so many of us because we just feel like that's just our normal and we're just going to manage the best we can, even though that's not necessarily true. And I'm sure at some point you realize that you should maybe see a doctor. And when did you finally decide that you should seek some medical attention for this?
Well, in 2024, my sister Anna was diagnosed with Barrett's esophagus. And she and I talked, and we compared symptoms, and mine were very, very similar to hers. And she encouraged me to go and be tested. And I didn't react as fast as I should have. And she ended up passing away in November of that year. And she made me promise that I would do that. Sorry. And
No,
so,
it's okay. I'm so sorry. We can take a moment.
no, it's okay.
I'm so sorry to hear that. Was it from Barrett's esophagus?
She had Barrett's esophagus and pulmonary fibrosis, and she had a lot of other issues, but she did have those things. And so she passed away in November, and she made me promise that I would be tested. And so I was tested in April of last year, and that's when I got my diagnosis.
So, for those patients who may be listening and maybe they feel an affinity towards your situation, what was the diagnosis like? I mean, like, this is so important because it's that moment when we make a decision to finally consult a healthcare provider. And what was that process like? Did you find a gastroenterologist? Did you already have a gastroenterologist? Take us through the steps that you took.
Well, I already had a GI doctor, but I needed a referral to get and I was due a colonoscopy, so I needed a referral to get the endoscopy. So I went to my primary and got that, and then I went to my GI doctor, and we met first, and I told her what my concerns were, and she said, "Well, you're due for your colonoscopy anyway, so I'll just do the endoscopy at the same time." And so we scheduled that, and and I had it, and then she called later and told me what the results were for the endoscopy, which was Barrett's esophagus. I was not surprised, but I was devastated because, and here's the other piece of the puzzle, our mother had GERD lifelong and died from pulmonary
Wow.
fibrosis. So now I've got two family members who have died from these diseases, with these diseases. And so I took it very serious. I was devastated.
Now, did you really understand previously the relationship between GERD and Barrett's? Did you understand? Did you have much information about that?
I had no information about it. I had no understanding of how those two things were correlated. And the other thing I didn't understand, where I'll go back to the symptoms that I had, I didn't understand all these insidious little symptoms, how you can stitch them together and they're Barrett's. The constant throat clearing, the phlegm at the back of my throat, the sore throat all the time, the nasal drip, and then of course the heartburn and indigestion. And our family, the running joke was always, my mother's name was Lena and her maiden name was Bonner, and we would always say, we got the Lena Bonner drippy nose. And all of us, I mean, you
Oh,
can ask any of my siblings, we all always have a tissue in our pocket, in our purse, anywhere. We always have the Lena Bird drippy nose. And the family joke is not a joke.
right. And a lot of people may assume like, oh, it's just allergies or it's the air or I have a cold coming on. And that's an interesting one. And we get into this in our episodes when the experts talk about signs and symptoms, but it's always powerful to hear from patients like you who can really have a testimony about what they experience, because it really helps other patients understand this condition and hopefully seek healthcare for
Right.
it. There are so many people that have lived like you for years and years with acid reflux, with GERD, and they dismiss the symptoms as just, oh, it's just a nuisance. I'm going to pop some Tums or Rolaids and I'm just going to go on with my life, until something like what happened with you and your sister occurs. So I commend you for sharing that story, because it's not easy. And I hope that this really, truly reaches other people so that they can take the steps that you did. Now, did your doctor, or did you know that there was a link between Barrett's esophagus and esophageal cancer? Did that ever come up in your conversations?
When she told me that I had Barrett's esophagus and offered me a prescription to combat the the symptoms, she told me, she said, this is very serious because gone untreated, this can turn into esophageal cancer. And that's when what I like to refer to as Scrappy Robin comes out, because Scrappy Robin is not going to get esophageal cancer. And Scrappy Robin is going to do a whole lot of research. And that's when I went to my love of podcasts and I went to my Spotify account and I searched Barrett's esophagus, and your 4-part series popped right up.
Oh,
And that's when I learned so much that I didn't learn at the doctor's office, about the correlation between all of these things, all of these symptoms that I'd had for years. And also how it was such a if you went into esophageal cancer, that it was such a deadly disease. I had no idea it was right up there with pancreatic cancer. I had no idea that Barrett's esophagus and pulmonary fibrosis were linked. It was so informational. I felt like the heavens had opened up and the angels were singing.
well, first of all, I'm so glad you found that series. We're so grateful to Castle Biosciences for supporting that episode and allowing us to create that content and put it out there for patients to access. It's been a game changer. I didn't really know myself much about Barrett's esophagus when we started researching and collaborating on how we could bring this education to patients. What was fascinating to me, and I don't know if you found this fascinating, was when I think it was Dr. Lister talked about the esophagus and the changes to the esophagus. If you've had GERD for so many years, almost the GERD doesn't feel like it's not GERD. It doesn't feel like you don't have that heartburn, and this because the esophagus, the lining is changing. So you feel like, oh, I'm cured. I don't have this anymore. I don't have any symptoms, and that's the scary part. I thought. Did you have the same understanding when you first got diagnosed?
No, I knew so little, and so little was imparted to me when I got the diagnosis. I learned so much more from your 4-part series that I learned in any doctor's office. It was revelatory. I just can't even tell you what it meant to me. I know I listened to podcasts a lot in my car. And so that day I was in my car when I listened to that podcast. And when I got home, my poor husband had already gotten home from work. And I know I talked his ear off for over an hour.
Well, since you mentioned you talking your husband's ear off for an hour, what stood out the most from the episodes that you listened to? Like, what was like really like that moment where, oh my God, this is really helpful for me?
Learning about the TissueCypher. I wanted that test.
And can
And
you describe what that is a little bit more?
well, the TissueCypher,
Yes.
yeah, they use the same tissue that they used to diagnose me to take my tissue, and I am able now to know what my personal risk is of Barrett's esophagus turning into esophageal cancer. And that was just so, it was such a relief to know what my risk was. And luckily, I'm low risk. Uh, I
And
couldn't be happier about that. But I'm still taking it very seriously. I mean, I know that if I don't manage these symptoms, that can turn on me. So I'm not turning a blind eye to the fact that I have Barrett's esophagus, but it's given me time to deal with it on my terms because I've always been a patient who chooses to find a natural solution to a health issue that I have. And so my choice when I was diagnosed was to deal with this with diet and lifestyle changes and not take the prescription drug. So when I got my TissueCypher results and they came back that I was low risk, then I felt like I had time to really settle in and try to deal with this with lifestyle changes and diet instead of taking a prescription drug, which is always my choice.
oh, that's so interesting. Now let's back up a little bit because part of the reason we do what we do at Gastro Girl is to bring information to patients. Sometimes we're general and we just talk in general terms with our experts, but sometimes there are diagnostic tools or treatments that we need to say the name of, and TissueCypher is one of them. It's something that's very unique, and it's something that has evidence behind it that shows the power of risk stratification and understanding your risk for cancer.
Right.
And so my next question is, and I think this is so important, when you went to your next doctor visit or you heard about this test, did you go back to your doctor and ask for the test? Did they know about the test? Because I think this is critical insight here.
I think my situation's unusual. In fact, I hope it's unusual. The first thing I did was I wrote my GI doctor a 2-page letter. And because I think that she was disappointed that I would not take the PPI because she didn't think I was taking the diagnosis serious, which couldn't have been further from the truth. I took it very seriously. So I wrote her a letter and I told her, I said, I am taking this serious. I don't want you to think I'm not because I choose not to take the prescription. And I outlined about my mom and my sister, and then I told her about the your podcast, the 4-part series. And I said, I've learned about this test called a TissueCypher test, and I would really like to get that test. And then based on the podcast with Dr. Lister, I asked questions that I didn't know that I needed to ask. I asked how long was the section in my esophagus that had Barrett's esophagus tissue? Was it dysplastic or non-dysplastic? All these things that I kind of feel like should have been said to me, and I shouldn't have had to, as the patient, go and dig for all this information. And it's just really lucky for me that I'm a naturally curious person and I find the human body incredibly fascinating. So those things really helped me to advocate for myself. So in the letter, I told her I would like to have the TissueCypher test done. And her nurse called me back and answered the questions about the section size and dysplastic or non-dysplastic, and then told me we don't offer that test.
Interesting.
So I did a lot of digging around, and I actually, I'm a little bit of a bloodhound when I need to be, and I called Castle Biosciences and asked them who in Richmond, Virginia, which is where I live, offers this test. And they were very professional about it and told me, we can't necessarily, give you the name of a doctor because that would be like making a recommendation, and we can't do that. And I understood that. So I made an appointment with a second GI doctor that I'd never been to before, and went in, and we went over my symptoms and whatnot. And I said, I'd like to get this TissueCypher test done. And he said, we don't offer that test.
Interesting.
I thought, well, here we go. I'm going to spend a fortune in copays going to all these doctors trying to find somebody who does this test. So Scrappy Robin gets back into business and she calls Castle Biosciences back. And I said, look, I understand your position. Can I give you my name and my phone number and all of my information? Would you disseminate it to any doctors in my area who offer the test? And they can call me. I'm fine with that. They can all call me. And so
I love the tenacity. This is patient advocacy for yourself at its best.
I can be a little tenacious. I don't really necessarily take no for an answer.
I love it. This is such a great example for patients everywhere. Really, truly is.
So then I called Castle Biosciences back. I said, look, I'm going to spend a fortune, please do this. And so they put me on hold. They were very nice. I could tell they were kind of laughing at me. And they put me on hold and they came back and they said, look, we're going to have the field rep for your area call you. And I got off the phone and I said to myself, fat chance that's going to happen. So, and I had to laugh because I thought, here I go. I've got to fight for this. And within 45 minutes, the rep called me, and I almost started crying. Because
you're gonna make me tear up because it's so powerful, and it's not about anything but information that you, the patient, got, and you took action. And there is no better pathway than the pathway that you've had, because you took action, you understood, you took information that was evidence-based, and you took action steps and advocated for yourself. And I can't tell you how many patients I talk to, they struggle, they accept the status quo with how they're feeling, and that doesn't have to happen. And you're a living and breathing example of this for this particular condition, but it can translate over across any condition, whether it's in GI or not. This is a great example when you have evidence-based information by experts. You take that information and you take action. And that's the huge message here. And I commend you, Robin. This is it's emotional for me too, because, I do these podcasts and I never take it for granted that it's going to affect somebody and it's going to change someone's life. Right. So when I have you on here and you're telling this, it's emotional for me, because it's like, wow, what we do matters. And our partners and sponsors, it matters all collectively. It's a team. It wouldn't happen without our sponsors, our partners, and patients like you. So I am so grateful. But now that I've given you a moment to collect yourself, please continue, because this is important.
Well, the rep called me back and I got the test, and they called back when the results were in and told me, what my risk was and that it was low. Well, they told me it was low and left me a message. And I called back and I said, how low is low? Because to you, low might be 5% out of 10. I want to know my exact results. So they sent me the results, and it was 3.1%. I think that translates into 0.2% a year over a 5-year period. So it's very low. And I was ecstatic. I was so grateful to get that result, because I really had felt like up until that point that I was a ticking time bomb. And, my turn to die the way my mother and sister died was coming. And so when I got that result, I thought, okay, I can breathe. I'm not a ticking time bomb. I've got time to deal with this on my terms and see if I can't deal with it with diet and lifestyle changes. And when I say lifestyle changes, I think people think, well, what could be a lifestyle change? Well, it's a lot of stuff. It's not eating too fast. And when you grow up in a family of 6 kids and there's not enough leftovers for everybody to have leftovers, you eat as fast as you can. And so it was slow down, take a bite, put your fork down, chew every single bite in your mouth, swallow, then have another bite. It was not eating past 5 or 6 o'clock at night. So I had 2 to 3 hours before I got in bed at night. It was eating smaller meals. It was not eating some of the fun food. And when I say fun food, I mean chocolate, a glass of red wine, onions and garlic, any citrus. Those are lifestyle changes. And so I had to embrace those and prove to myself that I could manage my symptoms by doing that, and it worked.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So, how did when you now that in retrospect, now that you've gone through this process, w- what what has changed for you in how you're managing your Barrett's?
Well, I love to cook, and I love to cook with the fun foods. So I'm not doing as much cooking with the fun foods, or I'm finding a way to make those same recipes with some adaptations. So that has changed. Um, when people invite us out to dinner, I have to be careful about what time we're going to eat. And I feel like I'm 90 when I say that. But it's just, do I go to dinner and eat at 8 o'clock and up all night miserable because of what time I ate? Or do I, you know, stick to my guns and say, no, I really, I need to be finished eating by 6 so that I don't have to stay up till 11 o'clock at night so that I'm not miserable all night.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, do you feel more in control
Oh,
after
yeah.
after all this has passed now?
And I also am not as likely to be that patient that doesn't push back. I mean, I really had to push back. And so I'm not going to be that person anymore. I mean, there's a nice way to advocate for yourself. You don't have to be a bully about it and use bad language about it, but I just I'm gonna stick to my guns with doctors from now on and say this is the way I want this done. And if it's not costing them anything, then why tell me no?
What would you say to somebody who's newly diagnosed with Barrett's or who has this long-standing GERD?
I would say you need if in retrospect, if it were me again, I would I wouldn't walk, I would run to a GI doctor and get an endoscopy and find out whether or not, you have Barrett's esophagus or, heaven forbid, esophageal cancer. And if a doctor told me they didn't do that test, I would insist. And I think one of the reasons they didn't do it is I don't fit the profile. I'm not a man. I'm not overweight. I don't smoke. I mean, I'm actually, other than this little hiccup, I'm pretty healthy.
Yeah,
And
that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense, and we hear that a lot from patients, like, "I didn't fit the profile." We
Mhm.
hear that a lot in IBD. I've interviewed patients where they didn't fit the typical profile of an IBD patient, and they weren't given colonoscopy. But someone who was gets the colonoscopy and gets diagnosed why this other patient is suffering for years and years.
Right.
So it happens more than we think. That's why, to continue to educate patients from patients like you to continue searching out evidence-based information. I mean, there's a lot of stuff on the internet. Some is very helpful, some is very detrimental, potentially harmful. So, to find credible sources and organizations that provide evidence-based, expert-led content is key.
Mhm.
Number one, and then to bring that information, not to diagnose yourself or to find your own treatments, but to really take that information and bring it to your healthcare provider to have a shared decision-making conversation. And I like also what you said about, taking it a step further. Like, you called the company. And that's why, like, I'm so transparent when we have these episodes and they're sponsored, or we have different companies, whether treatments or diagnostics, that we are very transparent about who they are, so that this is a perfect example. We're not selling tests or telling
Right.
patients to get this test. We're providing information, and you taking it a step further and actually calling the company
Mhm.
was, really that moment, that shining moment in your journey.
Right.
What would you say to patients who may be like, "Oh, I can call the company?" Like, I mean, who would think of that, right?
Well, y you know, there's always more than one way to skin a cat. I mean, I've been told that since I was a little girl. And the other thing I've been told, my father used I grew up on a tobacco farm, and we were workers on the tobacco farm. It wasn't like somebody else was doing the work, and we got given some pretty arduous tasks for little girls. And I remember several times in my life, my dad would tell me to do something, I'd say, "I can't." And he'd say, there's no such word as can't. And I could hear my daddy. And that's what I wanted to say to my doctors that wouldn't do the test. There's no such word as can't. You're going to do that test.
I love
And
it.
you asked me what were my first thoughts when I heard the first of your 4-part series with Dr. Lister. And one of my thoughts was, and you probably have to edit this out, come hell or high water, I'm getting that test.
No, we don't have to edit that out. I love
Okay.
it. Robin, as we wind down our episode, and I could talk to you all afternoon, it truly is like two girlfriends talking about a really important topic and giving advice to one another. What do you wish more patients understood about Barrett's esophagus?
I think for me, the biggest thing was all of the little symptoms that I had no idea were connected to Barrett's esophagus. I don't think the average person would think that a drippy nose would have anything to do with Barrett's esophagus. You think I've got 2 cats? Of course I've got a drippy nose. And I think that that's my biggest takeaway, or I would like people to take away from this, is it's not always just about something that you feel like's in your throat. And the other thing is the throat clearing. I'm convinced that I was not chosen for a federal case for jury duty because I was in that courtroom with probably 200 potential jurors. And I cleared my throat the entire time. I was having a really bad morning.
Oh,
And
wow.
and I didn't raise my hand for one question that should have excluded me, but I got sent home. And I'm sure they were thinking, we don't want that woman sitting in that jury box during this whole trial clearing her throat. It's annoying.
I don't mean to laugh, but I just can visualize they're probably like, oh my goodness. But in all, but that's a good way to get out of jury duty, I guess, if someone's looking to get out of jury duty. No,
Yeah,
just kidding.
absolutely.
I actually love jury duty. I'm probably like the only one. I'm like waiting for like them to call me again. I find it so interesting as a side note. But what other let's go back, because as we summarize, like what other are some of the not so obvious symptoms that you would associate with Barrett's esophagus, just so we recap this at the end here.
Sore
The throat
throat.
clearing, the nasal
Yeah.
dripping.
I always had a sore throat. My purse is full of throat lozenges. Any flavor you can find, any kind, made by anybody. I always had a sore throat, always had chloroseptic. And with the diet changes that I've made, and the lifestyle changes that I've made, I haven't had a sore throat in forever. Now I've still got the phlegm and the throat clearing and things like that, but some of my symptoms have really subsided. And the better I am about my diet and my lifestyle changes, the better off I do. I mean, my symptoms, if I'm a 100% into the plan that I crafted for myself, my symptoms go away totally.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And now, just so there's surveillance, right? And because you have low risk, what does that surveillance look like for you with your doctor? Like, when do you go in to get rechecked, and how does that work?
She wants to recheck me again in April of this year. I think it's April, yeah, and see what the tissue looks like based on the choices that I made to manage the Barrett's esophagus.
Well, that's great. So maybe you can come on again in April and tell us how it's going. I mean,
Yeah, see how I
that's
did?
amazing. Yes, amazing.
Yeah.
So I know we're running out of time, but I am just over the moon with your amazing journey, and so proud of you for really being an advocate for yourself. And again, it's such a great example for patients everywhere. But if you could tell someone who's listening right now, the key takeaways from your experience, what would they be?
Don't take no for an answer. The squeaky wheel really does get the grease. And just don't be intimidated by people in professions that we have always looked up to. They're just people, just like us. And don't let them tell you no. If you, in your heart, you need to have a test done, do not let anybody tell you no.
Oh, Robin, thank you so much for sharing your story so openly and honestly. And hearing how education can help patients feel more confident and empowered in conversations with their doctors is really why we do this work. And I'm just so humbled to have you on the show, and again to share this information with others who are listening. And our mission has always been to provide people trusted, evidence-based digestive health information so patients can make informed decisions alongside their care teams. I just want to also say that this educational series is brought to you with support from Castle Biosciences. Robin's story reflects her personal experience, and Gastro Girl remains committed to providing balanced, evidence-based education to help patients have informed conversations with their healthcare providers. And if you'd enjoyed or got something from this episode, which I hope you have, please share it with someone who this may benefit. Like, subscribe to our channel, and to visit gastrogirl.com or ACG site, gi.org/patients for more patient information.
Thank you for listening to the Gastro Girl podcast. For more information and resources, please visit gastrogirl.com. Do you have a question for Gastro Girl? Please email podcast@gastrogirl.com. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in the Gastro Girl podcast are not a substitute for medical advice from your healthcare professional. Please consult a licensed clinician in your state regarding all matters related to your health.